The morning skies over Earth had never been clearer. The sun shone brightly over the vast oceans and sprawling cities, its rays touching everything with a sense of warmth and hope. For the first time in history, the people of Earth believed they had finally achieved a future without war, without suffering. After centuries of violence and struggle, peace was now within their grasp. The arrival of the Kaivari was the signal that this new chapter was about to begin. The Kaivari, species from a distant star system, had traveled across the galaxy for one purpose: to help Earth. Their fleet of sleek silver ships, beautiful and mysterious, hovered above the planet like a quiet omen. They did not come in force, but in peace. Earth's leaders, scientists, and diplomats gathered in anticipation. Never had humanity been offered such a rare gift on alliance with one of the most advanced and peaceful civilizations in the galaxy. For weeks, the Kaivari had sent peaceful communications through the airwaves, speaking of unity, understanding, and an end to conflict. They offered the humans of Earth advanced technology, the likes of which had never been seen before. The promise of clean energy, medical advancements, and cures for diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. In exchange, all they asked for was friendship. The Kaivari were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They were tall, graceful beings with translucent skin that shimmered in the light. Their eyes, large and luminous, seemed to see straight through a person, as if they were looking into their very soul. Their voices, when they spoke, had a calm, almost hypnotic quality. A soft hum that seemed to settle in the mind like a comforting lullaby. The moment they landed, Earth's leaders and the world's most powerful governments gathered to meet. Them news channels from every country broadcasted the event live, while millions of people watched in awe. It was a moment in history, a moment of hope. But as with every great story, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. A mysterious invitation. It all started with an invitation that only a few select humans were chosen to receive. These people were not world leaders, nor were they famous. Were ordinary citizen scientists, engineers, veterans of wars long forgotten, and even a few historians. They were the ones chosen to speak with the Kaivari first. The message was simple: we wish to understand you, to help you. Join us, and together we can build a future of peace. The invitation was extended with no explanation. No reason why this group had been singled out. It was strange, it felt personal, but the promise of peace was too great to ignore. These humans, eager for a better world, accepted the invitation without question. When they boarded the Kaivari ship, the feeling of awe was overwhelming. The interior of the ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. Walls that seemed to shimmer, almost alive, with glowing symbols and alien writings. The air smelled faintly of flowers, and the atmosphere was calm, almost serene. They were led to a grand hall where the Kaivari diplomats awaited them. Their leader, a tall figure with long flowing hair, stepped forward. "We have watched your world for many years," the Kaivari leader said, his voice like a melody that vibrated in the chest. "We have seen your struggles, your suffering, your wars, but we have also seen your resilience, your hope, and now we offer you a way to end all of it." The humans were silent, captivated by the beauty of the ship and the calmness of the Kaivari. Their message was clear. Earth had been chosen for something greater. Yet, as they spent more time with the Kaivari, something began to feel off. It wasn't anything they could put their finger on, but it was a feeling deep in their gut, like an itch that couldn't be scratched. They were told they would be taken to a hidden facility, a place where they could see the full extent of the Kaivari's gift. No one objected. They were too eager to see the wonders the Kaivari had promised. Little did they know, their Livisand. Earth's future were about to change forever. A promise broken, though. First sign that something was wrong came when they arrived at the Kaivari facility. It was located deep within a remote region of Earth's wilderness, miles away from any city, hidden beneath thick layers of forest and mountains. As they landed, the facility came into view. It was an enormous structure, stretching deep into the Earth's crust inside, the Kaivari explained, was where they would share the gift of peace with humanity. The walls of the facility were lined with advanced technologies, some of which the humans had only dreamed of. There were machines that could heal wounds instantly, devices that could eliminate diseases with a mere touch, and energy sources that could power entire cities for centuries without harm to the environment. For the first time in their lives, the humans felt a true sense of hope. They marveled at the possibilities. But there was one that was off limits, that caught their attention. It was a large chamber, sealed tight. The Kavari would never allow anyone to enter it, no matter how much they begged or asked. That was when the unease began to grow. There were whispers among the group. Some of the humans started to feel a sense of dread, like something was being kept from them. It was subtle at first. A quiet unease, nagging feeling that they weren't seeing everything. They began to wonder what the Kavari weren't telling them. Then, one evening when everyone was asleep, a small group of humans made a decision. They would sneak into the forbidden chamber and find out what the Kavari were hiding. As they approached the door, they were surprised to find it unguarded. The room was empty, and the walls inside were lined with strange, glowing symbols that looked like nothing they had seen before. The air was thick with an unfamiliar energy. In the center of the room was a large container, sealed tight with strange metallic locks. Curiosity overpowered caution, and one of the humans, an engineer named Sarati, decided to open it. Clicked open, and as they lifted the lid, a horrible, cold feeling washed over them. Inside the container was a single object of crystal, glowing with an unnatural light. But it wasn't just the crystal that sent chills down their spines. It was the vision that came with it. As soon as Sarah touched the crystal, images flooded her mind. Horrifying, terrifying images of earth in flames, entire cities reduced to rubble, people running, screaming. Alien ships gave. Our ships gave a rise, ships rained destruction upon them. But what was worse, the crystals showed that the Kavari had not come to help Earth. They had come to manipulate it. To make Earth into a weapon that would help them control the galaxy. The vision lasted only a few moments, but it was enough. Sarah pulled her hand away from the crystal, her breath heavy and shaky. The others gathered around her, their faces pale and filled with dread. The truth was clear. Earth wasn't a friend to the Kavari. It was a resource, and they were no longer just guests on an alien world. They were pawns in a much larger game, the Deathworlders. First Muvaz, Sarah, and the others tried to comprehend the nightmare they had uncovered. The Kavari's true nature began to show itself. The peaceful facade cracked. The smiles faded. The Kavari no longer seemed welcoming. They were calculating, distant, and cold. They had been watching the humans for far longer than anyone had known, and their true intentions were far darker than anyone had imagined. The humans who had made the discovery were quickly silenced. The Kavari threatened them with the destruction of their families, their homes, their entire planet. They tried to warn the others, but it was too late. The Kavari had already set their plan in motion. And then, in a shocking turn of events, the Deathworlders made their move. The Deathworlders were a group of humans descendants of Earth's most violent, resilient survivors. They were the ones who had been bred to survive hostile environments. They had fought wars that most civilizations couldn't even imagine. They were Earth's true warriors, and they were the last line of defense. The Kavari had underestimated them. With the truth of the Kavari's intentions now exposed, the Deathworlders rose from the shadows. They had been waiting for this moment, prepared for the inevitable betrayal. They knew Earth's future was in danger, and they were ready to fight back. As the first battle raged in the skies above Earth, the Kavari were taken by surprise. They had not expected humanity's resilience, especially from the Deathworlders. And as Earth's true warriors fought back, the Kavari realized they had made a grave mistake. The war for Earth's freedom had just begun. The battle between Earth's Deathworlders and the Kavari had only just begun, but the stakes were already higher than anyone could have imagined. The skies above Earth were streaked with the glowing trails of combat ships as the two forces clashed, each side determined to prove their dominance. Yet, there was still much the world didn't understand. What were the Deathworlders? And why had they waited until now to fight? For years, humanity's history had hidden the truth. The Deathworlders were not just ordinary humans, nor were they a random group of survivors. They were the descendants of those who had thrived in Earth's most hostile environments, places where the laws of survival were cruel, and the weak were consumed by the very planet they tried to inhabit. The origin of the Deathworlder century, before the arrival of the Kavari. Humanity had explored the farthest reaches of space and terraformed some of the harshest planets known. To man, it was a desperate, dangerous mission to secure the survival of the human race, but it came at a cost. Those who were sent to these extreme worlds were altered by the hostile environments in ways no one could have predicted. On planets with toxic atmospheres, volcanic eruptions, and crushing gravity, human bodies adapted to survive the impossible. Their bones grew denser, their muscles became tougher, their senses sharpened. Over generations, the Deathworlders evolved into a breed of humanity unlike any other, a people who could survive what would kill a normal human in an instant. But there was more to the story. Over time, these hardened humans were forgotten by the rest of Earth. They were labeled as exiles, or outcasts, by the governments and elite societies of Earth. Their existence was largely ignored, and they were driven into the shadows of Earth's underworld, far from the bright cities and wealth of civilization. What the Kavari didn't know, however, was that the Deathworlders had never really disappeared. They had been watching, waiting. They knew the Kavari would eventually come, as they knew what that meant for Earth. Their training had prepared them for this moment, the defense of their world, their people, and their future. The Kavari's hidden agenda. The Kavari had underestimated the power of humanity. They believed that by offering Earth's advanced technology, they could bring peace. But their true plan was darker than anyone could have imagined. The Kavari's arrival wasn't just about sharing technology or offering a dit, was about control. The Kavari were no mere peacekeepers. They had long sought to unite the galaxy under their rule, and they viewed Earth as a powerful pawn in their grand scheme. They had engineered humanity's history of war, suffering, and destruction, carefully manipulating Earth's leaders and instigating conflict to push humanity toward a state of chaos. Now, with Earth weakened by years of internal strife, the Kavari believed it was time to move in and make Earth their ally, whether the humans liked it or not. What they didn't count on, however, was the fierce resistance of the Deathworlders. The Deathworlders weren't just strong in body, they were strong in spirit. They understood the Kavari's true intentions and were ready to fight back with everything they had. They had been preparing for this moment for centuries, knowing that one day, Earth would need its greatest warriors. And so, the conflict escalated quickly. The Kavari's ships, once seen as a symbol of hope, became targets of rage. Earth's cities, once peaceful and thriving, now became battlefields. The Deathworlders, armed with old Earth technology, mixed with their own brutal, adaptive strategies, began to strike back at the Kavari with precision and ferocity. Every attack was a calculated blow. They knew the Kavari were not invincible, and their greatest advantage lay in their ability to fight in ways the Kavari couldn't anticipate. But even as the Deathworlders fought to defend their home, knew that the Kavari had an advantage of their own, advanced technology. Despite the Earthborn warriors' strength, the Kavari had weapons beyond human comprehension, capable of turning the tide of battle in an instant. What the Deathworlders didn't know was that the Kavari had also infiltrated Earth's most important institutions, silently placing agents who were loyal to their cause. The Deathworlders would soon find themselves fighting not only alien invaders but their own. People who had unknowingly been manipulated by the Kavari, the hidden. War within the true battle wasn't just in the skies or on the ground, it was within the very heart of Earth itself. There was a hidden war happening at the political and social levels of the planet. As the Kavari's plans slowly unraveled, their agents within the government began to rise, sowing discord among Earth's leadership. Governments began to fracture as power-hungry individuals aligned themselves with the Kavari, believing that joining the alien forces would ensure their control over the planet. Earth's politicians, diplomats, and military commanders found themselves at odds. Some refused to believe the Kavari could be anything but benevolent, while others began to realize the truth but didn't know how to respond. Fear gripped Earth's leaders, and in the chaos, the Deathworlders became the only reliable force standing against the Kavari's manipulation. Yet, even the Deathworlders weren't without their own divisions. Not all the Deathworlders were united in their cause. Some, raised in the brutal environments of far-flung planets, had lost their sense of humanity. They no longer saw Earth as their home, but as a world that had failed them, a world worth abandoning. They argued that the Deathworlders should take control, not just of Earth, but of the entire galaxy. They believed that they, more than the Kavari, were the true heirs to the galaxy's future. Their vision was one of domination and power, and they would stop at nothing to achieve it. These rogue Deathworlders soon became a significant threat. They saw the Kavari's arrival as an opportunity to seize power for themselves. Their goal was not to protect Earth, but to use the conflict as a means to rise above it all, to become the true rulers of the galaxy. They began making secret deals with Kavari sympathizers and other alien factions, planning a coup that would change the galaxy forever. The Kavari's counterattack, as the Deathworlders fought valiantly to protect Earth, Kavari responded with brutal efficiency. They had underestimated the resistance at first, but now they understood the threat humanity posed. They unleashed their most powerful weapon, a fleet of massive warships capable of annihilating entire cities with a single blast. These ships, each the size of a small moon, entered Earth's atmosphere with terrifying speed, and their weaponry began to decimate Earth's cities. The Deathworlders were not prepared for such a scale of destruction. Despite their strength, they were no match for the advanced weaponry the Kavari possessed. The humans fought back with all their might, but the sheer power of the Kavari's war machines began to push them back. With each passing day, the Kavari advanced further into Earth's territory, reducing Earth's resistance to a fraction of its former strength. But the Kavari made one critical mistake. They failed to account for the one thing the Deathworlders possessed that they could never have: unpredictability. Human resilience was not just in their strength or intelligence, but in their ability to adapt to situations no one could foresee. The Deathworlders began to learn the Kavari's tactics, to understand their strategies, and to counter them in ways that even the Kavari hadn't anticipated. The Deathworlders strike back. A glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. The Deathworlders, fighting against overwhelming odds, began to strike back with unprecedented force. They took to the skies with guerrilla tactics that baffled the Kavari. They targeted Kavari supply lines, taking down key warships and cutting off their reinforcements. They sabotaged communication channels and disrupted the Kavari's advanced technology, forcing the aliens to adapt to human-style warfare. The Kavari were not used to such chaos. For centuries, they had prided themselves on their order and control, but the Deathworlders thrived in chaos. They fed off it. Their attacks were wild, unpredictable, and relentless. But even as the battle raged on, the true nature of the conflict began to reveal itself. Earth was no longer just fighting for survival, it was fighting for its very soul. The question was no longer who would win, but what kind of future Earth would have. Would it be one under the control of the Kavari, or one shaped by the Deathworlders, who had once been exiles, but were now humanity's last hope? And as the war continued to escalate, one question remained. Was Earth truly ready for the cost of its freedom? As the Earth groaned under the weight of war, its once optimistic future seemed distant, a fading dream overshadowed by the raging chaos of battle. The Deathworlders had made their first strike, and the Kavari had responded with terrifying force. Yet beneath this outer conflict, a darker, more complicated truth began to emerge. There were no clear heroes, no simple lines between good and evil. Humanity's fate was now intertwined with ancient secrets and impossible choices. The Deathworlders had shown the Kavari their strength. They had forced them to bleed. But the Kavari weren't finished. They'd only just begun to reveal the full extent of their power. The Earth, with all its mysteries and contradictions, would become the battleground for a war far more dangerous than anyone could have ever anticipated. The Kavari's counterattacked the Kavari, realizing that Earth's defenders, humanity's fiercest warriors, the Deathworlders, would not be easily vanquished. Launched a response unlike anything the planet had ever seen. It wasn't just their warships that threatened Earth, but their tactics. They understood that war was not only fought with weapons, but with ideas. They had already begun to manipulate the minds of Earth's leaders, infiltrating every institution of power. They used propaganda, psychological warfare, and subtle coercion to create doubt, division, confusion among humanity's governing bodies. Through encrypted channels and encrypted messages, they worked from the shadows to convince key politicians and generals that the Deathworlders were nothing more than radicals, bent on destroying the very fabric of humanity. The Kavari offered a peaceful solution: surrender the most powerful military assets to them, and the bloodshed would stop. Those who didn't comply would be labeled as traitors to Earth's future. But as the Kavari's influence grew, Earth's fragile alliances began to crack. Earth's political landscape became a chessboard, with many vying for control over the narrative. Should they trust the Kavari, who promised peace and prosperity? Or should they follow the Deathworlders, whose violent actions had saved Earth from immediate destruction, but also escalated the violence? The line between ally and enemy blurred, and the question of humanity's survival grew more uncertain. The Resistance's underground movement, while the elite debated in their chambers, humanity's true hope lay in the streets, in the underworld, where the Deathworlders still operated in secrecy. They knew that time was running out. They could not allow Earth to fall into the Kavari's grasp, nor could they trust every Deathworlder with a weapon. The radicals, those who sought to dominate the galaxy rather than protect it, were growing stronger by the day. The true defenders of Earth were in hiding, and deep beneath its oceans, it was there in the darkness that the real battle for Earth's future was fought, not with ships or weapons, but with whispers, sabotage, and strategy. The Resistance was a fractured organization, made up of ordinary citizens, scientists, former soldiers, and former enemies, united by a single goal: keep Earth free from both the Kavari and the rogue Deathworlders. The leaders of the Resistance understood that both threats were dangerous, but neither had humanity's best interests at heart. One of the key figures in this underground movement was a woman named Marla, once a Kavari sympathizer. She had watched the invasion unfold and witnessed firsthand the destruction that followed. She had seen Earth fall apart, its leaders swallowed by the Kavari's promises, and its cities burn under the Deathworlders' attack. Marla was a former politician, a woman who had once fought for peace and diplomacy, but now she saw a much harsher truth. There would be no peaceful resolution unless humanity took matters into its own hands in the dead of night. Marla and her followers worked tirelessly, planning strikes on Kavari supply lines, sabotaging their communication systems, and spreading the truth about the Kavari's true motives. As much as the Kavari claimed to be peaceful, their plans were far more sinister. Their agenda was not to help humanity. It was to conquer it, to use Earth as a stepping stone in their intergalactic quest for power. Through their network, Marla learned something that shook her to her core. The Kavari were manipulating Earth's environment, adjusting weather patterns and geological processes to weaken the planet's natural defenses. The oceans were rising, earthquakes were becoming more frequent, and crops were failing. The Kavari claimed these were natural phenomena, but the Resistance discovered otherwise. It was a controlled devastation, something the Kavari had engineered to force Earth into submission. And yet, amidst all this turmoil, Marla had learned of an even darker secret. The Kavari were not the only ones manipulating Earth. A select group of Deathworlders had come together under a new banner, one that had no interest in saving the planet, but in using it as their personal weapon. This faction, known as the Ascendants, believed that humanity was meant to dominate the galaxy, not just survive it. They were willing to turn Earth into a militarized hub, one that could rival even the most powerful alien empires. But their methods were ruthless. They wanted to rule, not liberate. The rift within the Deathworlders. Not all Deathworlders agreed with the Ascendants' plans, and a civil war was beginning to simmer among the ranks. the Deathworlders who fought for Earth's survival were torn. On one side were those who believed in Earth's natural path, protect the planet, preserve the future, and never fall under anyone's control. On the other side, the Ascendants saw Earth's war with the Kavari as a chance to seize ultimate power. To reshape the galaxy to fit their vision, it was a war within a war, and Earth's future was uncertain. Some Deathworlders felt that Earth's only hope lay in embracing the Kavari's technology, using it to overthrow the Ascendants and defeat the Kavari once and for all. Others, including the Resistance, feared that the Kavari's gifts were nothing but chains. Leading to further subjugation, Marla found herself caught between these factions, forced to navigate a delicate path of alliances and betrayal. Kavari, as dangerous as they were also immensely powerful, and their technology could be the key to defeating the Ascendants. But was it worth the price? Could humanity risk using the Kavari's technology, knowing that it might enslave them in the future? Marla knew that time was running out. Every day the Kavari grew stronger, their influence deeper. The Ascendants were already making moves to seize key military assets, and soon they would have enough power to challenge both the Kavari and the Resistance. The Deathworlders were on the brink of a civil war that could tear the planet apart. The question remained, could Earth, with all its divisions, survive the oncoming storm? Was it possible to unite the Deathworlders, the Resistance, and the Kavari's enemies in a single, final strike? Or would Earth collapse under the weight of its own history, its own people, and the aliens who sought to control it? The first strike, a bitter decision. As the war raged on, Marla gathered a small group of allies within the Resistance. They planned a daring strike, a raid on the Kavari's central command facility, located deep beneath the surface of Earth's most inhospitable desert. If they could disable the Kavari's communications network and sabotage their climate-altering technology, they could buy humanity the time it needed to regroup and formulate a true counterattack. It was a dangerous mission, but Marla knew it was their only chance. The night before the strike, Marla stood in the shadow of the Resistance's underground base, looking up at the fractured sky. The stars were dimmed by the fires of war, and the future of Earth seemed uncertain. Would they be able to protect their planet from the Kavari, from the rogue Deathworlders, and from themselves? She didn't have the answers. She knew one thing for sure. Earth had never needed its true protectors more than it did now. And in the depths of conflict, something greater than survival would be forged. The question was not if humanity could fight, but whether it could unite. The nights grew darker, the air heavier, and the battle for Earth's soul more treacherous with each passing day. Marla stood in the heart of the underground Resistance base. Overlooking a ragtag group of freedom fighters, she could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Their raid on the Kavari's central command facility was only hours away, but the uncertainty of the mission loomed over them. There was no going back after this. The Resistance would either make a significant impact against the Kavari, or fall entirely to their might. But even as the Resistance prepared for war, Marla couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were all being played. The deeper she dug into the Kavari's true plans, the more it became clear that this was never just about Earth. No, the Kavari had bigger ambitions. They were planting seeds for an empire that stretched far beyond the galaxy, and Earth was just a stepping stone, an experiment in manipulation, and the Deathworlders, ... They weren't as simple as they appeared either, were far too many. Factions, each with their own agenda. Humanity was drowning in webs of lies and deceit. With no clear way out, the Ascendants' hidden plan in the weeks leading up to the raid, Marla had uncovered a disturbing piece of information. The Ascendants, a faction of rogue Deathworlders, had begun infiltrating the Resistance. It started with small actions, seemingly innocent offers of alliances and resources. But soon, whispers of betrayal began to spread through the ranks. The Ascendants were not content with simply surviving or defending Earth. They had their own agenda: domination. They believed that the Deathworlders were the true heirs of the galaxy. Born from the harshest environments and toughened by brutal survival, they saw Earth's future not in its survival, but but in its control. To them, the Kavari were weak, naive. Their vision for Earth was far darker. They wanted the planet to become a weapons manufacturing hub, one capable of waging war on the entire galaxy. They had begun secretly amassing their own fleet, hidden away in the vastness of Earth's oceans, preparing for the moment when they could rise up and take what they believed was rightfully theirs. The Ascendants believed in power. By any means necessary, they had no interest in peace, and certainly not in the Resistance's ideals of freedom. They saw Marla and the other leaders of the Resistance as obstacles, and if they had to destroy them to secure their vision of the future, they would do so without hesitation. The betrayal that was about to unfold would shatter everything Marla had fought for, the Kavari's unexpected move just hours before the raid. As the Resistance prepared to launch their operation against the Kavari's central command facility, Marla received an encrypted message. It was from an unknown source, but the urgency in its tone made her hesitate. The message contained only a single sentence. The Kavari are not your enemy. They are the key to humanity's future. Beware the Ascendants, the words echoed. In Marla's mind, what did it mean? Who had sent it? Was it a trick? The Kavari had claimed to come to Earth to offer peace. Yet their manipulation of the planet's climate and resources suggested something far darker. The Resistance had been fighting them for months, thinking they were the primary threat. But this message, cryptic and dangerous, hinted at something else, something far worse than the case. Single quotes, VAR, was the real enemy humanity's own kind. Begins, despite her doubts, Marla had no choice but to proceed. The mission was too important. The Resistance's assault on the Kavari Central Command Facility, hidden deep beneath the sands of the desert, would cripple their climate-altering technology and prevent them from further manipulating Earth's environment. If they could destroy the facility and take out the Kavari leadership, it could buy humanity the time it needed to regroup. With the team in place, Marla led them through the blistering desert night. They had trained for this moment for months, moving in silence, blending with the shadows of Earth's most desolate terrain. The temperature dropped dramatically as they approached the Kavari facility, sprawling underground complex guarded by drones, automated defenses, and heavily armed soldiers. The plan was simple. Breach the facility, plant explosives in the control rooms, and retreat before reinforcements could arrive. But as they infiltrated the complex, the Resistance began to feel a growing unease. Something was wrong. The place felt too quiet. There were no guards, no surveillance cameras. It was almost as if they were expected. As Marla's team made their way deeper into the facility, a series of explosions rocked the ground beneath their feet. The building trembled, alarms blared, and the lights flickered. Within moments, the Resistance was surrounded. But it wasn't the Kavari soldiers who attacked them. It was the Ascendants. The rogue Deathworlders had infiltrated the mission from the very start, sabotaging their escape routes and leaving them with nowhere to run. Marla's heart sank as she realized the truth. The Ascendants had betrayed them. You never should have trusted us, Marla, a voice called out from the shadows. A figure stepped forward, his face obscured by a dark helmet. It was General Khan, one of the top leaders of the Ascendants. The Kavari are nothing but pawns. We've already secured control of this facility. Soon, Earth will be ours. Pulse quickened as she took in the situation. They had been set up. The Ascendants had been manipulating them from the inside. The Kavari, for all their faults, had never been the real enemy. The real danger had always been the Deathworlders, who sought to seize power for themselves. At any cost, we never wanted peace, Khan continued, his voice cold and harsh. Earth is a weapon, and now it will serve us. The dilemma: ally or defend. The Ascendant's forces closed in. Marla was faced with a choice: fight and try to escape, or reach out to the Kavari for an alliance. She knew the Kavari were not to be trusted, but neither were the Ascendants. Was too great. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to turn the tide. Perhaps the Kavari were Earth's only hope against the rogue Deathworlders. In a desperate move, Marla activated her communicator and sent out a distress signal to the Kavari. She had no way of knowing whether they would respond, but she had to take the risk. If Earth's true enemies were the Ascendants, then maybe the Kavari could become their reluctant allies. She could convince them. The next few moments seemed to stretch on forever. Marla's team was pinned down, and the Ascendants were closing in. The Kavari had arrived too late to stop the betrayal, but would they act in time to prevent Earth from falling into the hands of the Ascendants? As the tension mounted and the battle reached its climax, Marla waited for an answer. The future of Earth and humanity hinged on the next few moments. Would Earth's defenders rise together, or would they crumble under the weight of betrayal? The Kavari's response, just as the Ascendants closed in for the final strike. A sudden explosion rang out from the far side of the facility. The ground trembled, and the sound of heavy footfalls echoed through the hallways. The Kavari had arrived. Their ships, massive and menacing, had broken through the facility's defenses, landing just outside. As the Kavari soldiers stormed the complex, Marla found herself standing face to face with the very beings they had been fighting against. But now, with the Ascendants threatening to destroy everything, they were both enemies and allies in the same breath. The battle that followed was brutal and chaotic, a storm of violence and shifting allegiances. Marla and her team fought side by side with the Kavari, their old enemy, against the Ascendants. The true betrayers of Earth. The question of loyalty, who could be trusted, became irrelevant. All that mattered was survival. The first strike had been a failure, but it had led to something far more important: a fragile alliance. One born of desperation that might just be humanity's last hope. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the dust of battle and the uncertainty of what would come next. As Marla stood at the front of her team, watching the horizon burn with the aftermath of their desperate escape, she felt the weight of the moment crushing her. The betrayal of the Ascendants had sent shockwaves through her heart. But even more unsettling was the realization that Earth's fate now rested on a razor-thin edge. The Kavari were no longer her enemies, but could she truly trust them? The Deathworlders had already shown their destructive potential. And now, with the Ascendants in control, the planet's future was no longer just uncertain. It was at risk of being shattered completely. As she surveyed the battlefield, her mind raced through options. Escape was no longer an option. The Resistance had been scattered, its leadership fractured by betrayal, and Earth's defenses were crumbling under the weight of the Ascendant occupation. Marla knew they couldn't keep running. If they were to have any hope of regaining control, they would have to strike back now. But the Ascendants were everywhere. They controlled the planet's most important military resources and had cut off all escape routes. What's worse, they had humanity in their grip. The situation was dire. The Resistance had to stop the Ascendants before they consolidated their power. But how? They couldn't simply attack head-on. The Ascendants were too powerful, too well-organized. The Kavari, though reluctant allies, offered some hope. Their technology was far superior to anything humanity had. Perhaps with their help, they could turn the tide. But there was a greater question looming in the back of Marla's mind. Could they truly work with the Kavari? The Kavari's promises of peace had always been shrouded in manipulation. They had long claimed to want a peaceful galaxy, but their methods were underhanded, altering Earth's environment, using propaganda and destroying everything they couldn't control. Still, the Kavari weren't like the Ascendants. Ascendants were after domination, pure and simple. They were willing to use Earth as a weapon to conquer the galaxy. And they weren't above wiping out anyone who got in their way. It seemed Earth wasn't just a prize to them, it was a means to an end. Marla clenched her fist, pushing the swirling doubts aside. The fight wasn't over. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. She had to act, turning to her team. She called for a meeting. They had little time. The Ascendants were closing in, and every minute mattered. She had to convince her people, and the Kavari, that the only way forward was to unite. Gathering her remaining commanders, she outlined the plan. They would target key Ascendant strongholds, military bases, communication hubs, and weapons. depots they needed to cripple the Ascendant's ability to respond to a full-scale attack. But in order to do this, they would need to infiltrate the Kavari's most advanced technology. If they could gain access to it, they could fight back. Not just with force, but with strategy. The Kavari had far superior weapons and technological prowess. If they could somehow turn those tools against the Ascendants, they could start a revolution. "Are you sure we can trust the Kavari?" Jox, one of Marla's closest allies, asked, his voice edged with uncertainty. "I mean, we've been fighting them this whole time. We don't even know what they want now." Marla paused, her gaze hardening as she thought. "We don't have a choice. The Ascendants are the greater threat. The Kavari are powerful, yes, and dangerous in their own way, but they're not after Earth's total destruction. The Ascendants are. We need to ally with them for now. But they'll betray us too, won't they?" Jox's skepticism was clear. "I mean, how do you know they're not playing their own game? Can't trust anyone here." Marla shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "But if we don't act now, it won't matter. The Ascendants will wipe us out, and Earth will be their weapon. I won't let that happen." Her voice was resolute, and the team around her seemed to sense her conviction. Oh, there were still doubts in their hearts. They knew she was right. Time was running out, and Earth's future was at stake. With a new sense of urgency, Marla and her team began coordinating with the Kavari. The first meeting was tense. None of them knew whether they could fully trust the Kavari. But it became clear that they were as desperate as the Resistance. Their own survival depended on the downfall of the Ascendants. If the Ascendants were left unchecked, they would grow far too powerful, and even the Kavar would not be able to stop them. "We fight for survival, Darnath," the Kavar commander said in his deep voice. "Your planet is the key too. Both our futures. We will help you, but only if you help us destroy the Ascendants." "Then it's settled," Marla said, looking at her team, her mind already working through the logistics of the operation. "We strike together. We'll need a two-pronged approach. You provide the firepower, and we infiltrate their strongholds. We destroy their weapons and communications, and then we hit them where it hurts by taking out their leadership." The Kavari were quiet for a moment, but they seemed to agree with the plan. They had their own deep-rooted reasons to fight. The Ascendants, and they weren't about to let the rogue Deathworlders succeed. The plan was set in motion. The Kavari provided the Resistance with the firepower they needed, advanced weapons, cloaking technology, and combat strategies they had never imagined. The Resistance would infiltrate Ascendant strongholds across Earth, using the Kavari technology to bypass their defenses. Marla's heart beat faster with every passing second, knowing that this could either be their final stand or the spark that would ignite the fire of rebellion as the first strike began. The ground shook with explosions, the sound of battle filling the air. Resistance fighters moved like shadows, slipping past enemy lines and disabling communication arrays, taking out weapons caches and assassinating key Ascendant leaders. The Kavari ships hovered overhead, firing precision strikes to support their allies on the ground. But even with this new strength, the Ascendants were no pushovers. They were trained, well-equipped, and ruthless in their pursuit of power. The Resistance couldn't afford to lose any ground, not now. But as the days wore on, the lines between allies and enemies grew blurrier. As they fought side by side, Marla began to realize something important. The Kavari weren't as unified as she had thought. There were factions within their ranks. Different opinions on how the war should be fought and how Earth should be treated once the Ascendants were defeated. Some Kavari wanted to take over the planet for themselves, just as the Ascendants had planned. Others, like Darnath, wanted to see Earth free from both the Ascendants and their own kind's imperial ambitions. Marla knew that the battle for Earth wasn't just a fight between different alien factions. It was also a struggle for control of the planet's future. Would Earth become a colony for the Kavari or the Ascendants? Or could it remain free, a place where humanity could determine its own destiny? As the final battle loomed on the horizon, Marla felt the heavy weight of that question. She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew this. Earth's fate would not be decided by one faction alone. It would be decided by the people of Earth, the ones who had fought and bled to keep their home safe. And that battle, the one for humanity's soul, was far from over. The world was falling apart in ways that no one could have imagined. Marla had seen Earth through many phases in her lifetime: the prosperity of the early years, the rise of new technologies, the hope for peace between humans and the other galactic species. But now, it was nothing more than a battlefield, a place where humanity's future hung by the thinnest of threads. The Deathworlders and the Kavari were no longer the only threats. A far darker power had emerged. Betrayal ran deeper than Marla had ever feared. And the Resistance's fight was no longer just about stopping the Kavari or defeating the Ascendants. It had become a war for survival against the very forces that claimed to be humanity's protectors. As the battle raged inside the Kavari's Central Command facility, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning metal. Explosions shook the walls of the underground complex, and the sound of heavy boots pounding the floor echoed in the chaos. Marla had always been a leader, calm under pressure, able to make quick decisions in the heat of battle, but this time she felt herself slipping, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. The betrayal had come at the worst possible moment. Just when the Resistance was about to make its move against the Kavari, the Ascendants had struck. They had been planted inside their ranks from the very beginning, sowing distrust and chaos. The very people Marla had trusted had turned on her. And she was now fighting for her life, for her people's future, and for a chance to right the wrongs that had led to this conflict. In the midst of the firefight, Marla's communicator crackled to life. The voice that came through was unmistakable, cutting through the noise of the battlefield like a sharp blade. "Marla, we're pinned down. They're everywhere. We need backup now." It was Jox, one of her closest allies, and the urgency in his voice was enough to make her blood run cold. The Resistance had been caught in a pincer movement, surrounded by the Ascendants, their most trusted fighters, turning against them. And the Kavari soldiers now bearing down on their position. It was a nightmare she had been preparing for, but somehow this felt different. There was no clear path forward, no easy way out. "Hold your position," she yelled into the communicator, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We're coming for you," she motioned to the rest of the team, who were already preparing for a fight. They had planned for this, perhaps not the full scope of the betrayal, but they had known that the Ascendants would eventually make their move. It was just a matter of time before the rogue Deathworlders turned on the Resistance, and the plan had been to take them out first, but things had gone horribly wrong. Instead of eliminating the Ascendants, the Resistance had become their target. Marla's thoughts raced as she formulated a new strategy. They couldn't fight the Ascendants head-on in the open. They needed to regroup and find a way to take them down before the Ascendants could fully mobilize. But that would take time they didn't have. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Another explosion ripped through the facility, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. Dust and debris filled the air, and the lights flickered. A voice boomed over the loudspeakers, an authoritative, cold voice that sent a shiver down Marla's spine. "This facility has been compromised," the voice announced. "All personnel are to prepare for immediate extraction. The Kavari forces have been neutralized. The Ascendants have assumed control." The message sent a shockwave through Marla's mind. What? The Kavari had been neutralized. That meant the Ascendants had taken out the very forces they had been fighting against. What had happened? How had the Ascendants managed to take control of the facility so quickly? The Kavari weren't weak. They were powerful, technologically advanced. Had they fallen that easily? Or was there something more going on here than met the eye? Marla's thoughts were interrupted as another explosion tore through the hallway. Time, it wasn't a blast from the Ascendants. It came from the Kavari's weapon systems. Well, walls are Moret in our route. Walls reverberating through the underground complex. The building was coming down, and there was no way out. The resistance had only one choice now: escape or die, without a second thought. Marla turned and sprinted toward the nearest exit, her team falling in behind her. The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance, but they couldn't stop. The ascendants were closing in. Every corner was a trap, every hallway a potential ambush, but there was no turning back now. Marla's only hope was to get her team out of the facility alive and regroup for the next phase of the plan. As they rounded a corner, they collided with another group of resistance fighters, this time with the Kavari. The once feared enemies were now allies, fighting side by side with Marla's team in a desperate bid for survival. There was no time for questions, no time for explanations. The ascendants were coming, and if they didn't act quickly, they would all die. The Kavari soldiers, led by a commander named Darnath, took point. Guiding Marla and her team through the facility's twisting corridors, Darnath was tall, with skin that shimmered a dark blue, his eyes glowing a faint purple. Despite the Kavari's earlier manipulations, he seemed earnest in his efforts to help them escape. But Marla knew better than to trust to easily. Alliances were fragile, especially when survival was on the line. As they made their way toward the exit, Marla's mind kept racing. What had happened to the Kavari? Why had they retreated so easily? Was it truly a coincidence that they were now in league with the Resistance? Or had the Kavari been working with the Ascendants all along, orchestrating a grand deception? The answer didn't matter right now. All that mattered was getting out alive. They could worry about allegiances later. For now, survival was the only goal. They reached the surface just as the last of the explosions rattled the earth beneath them. The desert night had turned into a hellscape, the sky painted orange by the fires raging in the distance. The Kavari had set up a defensive perimeter, their massive ships hovering overhead ready to provide air support. But the ground forces were still in disarray. The Resistance's escape route blocked by a wall of Ascendant soldiers. Marla stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. The Kavari's technology had helped them escape the facility, but now they were back in a new fight. The Ascendants had to be stopped at all costs. But before Marla could give any orders, the familiar crackle of her communicator rang through her earpiece. "This is General Khan of the Ascendants." The voice on the other end sneered. "We have secured Earth's future. You and your people are nothing but insects to be crushed. Stand down or face extinction." Marla's blood ran cold as she heard the words. The Ascendants had declared victory. Earth's fate was in their hands now. But it was not over yet. Marla could feel the fire of determination welling up inside her. There was still hope, still a chance to fight back. She wasn't going to let the Ascendants or anyone decide the fate of Earth. The war was far from over. And this time, it wasn't just about survival, it was about taking back control. It was about humanity's right to shape its own future. The stars above the desert burned brightly. Marla knew one thing for certain. Earth would never give up without a fight. And neither would she.